I have seen hundreds of these things at nights in the woods and rural areas around Memphis, starting around 2020. They are tall humanoid creatures with blacked out eyes, and they move slowly and in strange jerky movements. First time I saw them, I was visiting a veteran friend of mine who was down on his luck about midnight of Thanksgiving Day in 2020. He had been living in a rundown camper vehicle at the edge of the woods on his brother's property. Between his camper and the tree line there was the remains of an old trailer that had been destroyed by a tornado, with a street light on top of the pole that was used to run electricity to the destroyed mobile home. On the other side of the pole, approximately 15 yards off a field, an old dirt road that split in half, with tall grass, had brush at the edge of the far side of the field where the tree line started. I thought they were people hiding at first, as they seemed to be grouping more in the darker areas where the light from the pole was not as bright. I asked my friend about them, and he shrugged it off and said that they were always there, and they didn't bother him. He also told me no matter what, that you couldn't get close to one. So being a combat veteran with 2 deployments under my belt and my personal firearm from my vehicle, I attempted to approach these things. As I got closer, I noticed that they were solid white creatures with solid black eye sockets that moved in a jerky but very slow manner. There had to be about 50 or more in that field, down the dirt road and at the edge of the tree line and beyond. Determined to let something F around and find out, I continued to walk towards them, and all of a sudden, they all looked at me with black empty-looking sockets and instantly caused me to feel more fear than I ever remember having in my life before. I did not approach them that night. I turned away and got out of the area and took my buddy with me to stay safe a few days at my place. Since that first time I saw them, I have seen them about a dozen times since, always at night and around wooded areas at all different locations. I have since tried to run and catch them, and failed, because the creatures simply disappeared the moment I closed in within 5 to 10 yards, and lost direct eye contact for a mere flash. It's like they can phase in and out or something. If you get in close, you can see that the weird jerky movement is part of them, disappearing and then reappearing in a different position. I think they disappear anytime they move so they cannot be seen if they walk. I have pumped rounds from my AR-15 into one without a single shred of evidence of it left behind. These things do make audible noise that can be recorded, but do not show up on a video from a cell phone or old analog camcorder with a cassette tape. Animals also see them. However, I have tried to show them to people, and only about half of those I have shown have seen them. I have wondered if I was losing my mind, and if anyone else has seen them or tried other experiments with them. I have searched all over the internet, and only found a few cryptid creatures that share 1 or 2 similar things to them, but nothing that was close enough for me to be satisfied. The only thing that was really close was the origin of white zombies, sort of. There's been a few people tell me this shape-shifting creature, but they don't change or bleed. They seem to be different sizes, some larger, some smaller, and they group up in what I have come to call family clusters. 4 to 5 of them, usually with 2 taller ones and 1 or 2 smaller ones. Please let me know if you have any ideas on what they could be, or if you have seen them before. Many months had passed since I was nearly pulverized by the creature in the woods. I was with my buddy Joe when it happened, up in northern Ontario. We'd gotten ourselves lost in the dark of the forest, where monsters are known to prowl in the shadows of towering trees. Up here, monsters exist. Ultimately, it was Patrick who saved us. Patrick had been tracking the thing for weeks prior to saving our hides. According to him, the creature is a result of the top-secret government experiment dating back to the 1940s. He claims there are others, but none as dangerous as the Dogman. We searched high and low for the creature in the woods, but to no avail. By the end of March, our band of dogman hunters grew weary. Surely, the beast was dead. The northerly town of Kapuskasing enjoyed a brief period of normality. No more missing kittens, no more mutilated animal carcasses discarded in people's yards, or left on the side of the road for crows to pick apart. Life moved on. People forgot. Unfortunately, we did too. We let our guard down, and it cost us big time. We became fast friends. Hanging out at Patrick's cabin by the lake was a nice pastime on long weekends. Last weekend was no different, except, of course, it was different. It was a complete catastrophe. "Go grab us some firewood," Patrick said in his thick French accent. Him and Joe were huddled by the campfire, warming their hands over the flickering flames, drinking beer. The evening was cool and breezy. The grass was wet from previous night's rainfall. The moon hung like a bowling ball, big and round, full of holes. I forced myself off the patio chair and went in search of firewood. Behind the cabin, nearing the rim of the forest, I caught whiff of something foul, a mixture of grease and wet fur. I gagged. Figuring it was a bear, I picked up the pace. The last thing I wanted to be was bear food. Something shot through the dense woodland, a stone's throw from where I was standing, making my hair stand on end. Then it released a desperate howl. The sound filled me with dread. That's no bear. I scanned the vicinity, cursing myself for not bringing a flashlight. All I could see was the lake and forest. The feeling that I was being watched was impossible to ignore. Twigs snapped. I spun around like a superhero. 2 laser-red eyes were peering at me through the thick of the brush. Dogman. I scampered back to camp like a scared puppy. Patrick was yammering on and on about his precious Habs, and while they'll do better next year, he was furious. Never mess with a French Canadian when it comes to hockey, especially when you're dealing with the Montreal Canadiens. "Guys," I said, dropping the wood in front of the fire. Patrick ignored me. I tried my luck with Joe. "Joe," I cried, "something's out there." That caught their attention. In this part of the world, when someone utters that phrase, you'd better take notice. Joe and Patrick sat upright before I could get another word in. The creature in the woods howled. The sound ricocheted off the frigid lake like a fresh breeze. It sounded close. "Aw, crap," Patrick slurred, his face twisted in torment. This is a man who prides himself on being prepared, which none of us were at this moment. "Joe," he snapped, "go grab the guns." Joe stood up abruptly. The lawn chair stuck to his backside, like something out of a Winnie the Pooh movie. He stumbled and fell face first onto the soggy ground. Not a shining moment. Patrick cursed in French. "Fine, I'll do it myself," he said, and hurried towards their heavily armed microbus. Something growled, deep and guttural. Joe shot me with a look that said, "Let's go," and we raced to the safety of the cabin, slamming the door behind us. "Patrick better hurry," Joe said, gasping for air. His face looked like milk. We scooted to the window which overlooked the driveway. Patrick was fumbling for his keys, trying to unlock the hatch. He dropped the keys. One could imagine the cocktail of cuss words coming from his mouth at that moment. Nothing swears like the French. Our beating hearts sounded like bombs in the otherwise dead silent cabin. Our eyes were glued to Patrick, who retrieved his precious car keys. As Patrick was opening the trunk, something lunged in front of the cabin window. "Ah!" we screamed, in unison. "Dogman." The beast was hideous. It scowled at us through the frosted glass, exposing an artillery of jagged white teeth, its muzzle drenched in drool. It stood on its muscular hind legs, flexing its jangly claws inches from our face. I gasped. This was the dogman that nearly tore me to shreds a few months earlier. The door handle turned as the creature clawed at the cabin door, trying to get inside. The beast roared, sending shivers down my spine. Then it crashed into the door. Once again, my life flashed before my eyes. The creature in the woods had come back. Now it was going to finish me off. Shots rang out, sounding like 1,000,000 volts of thunder. Joe and I dropped to the floor and ate dust. Outside, Patrick was whooping and hollering and cussing in French. Joe stood up and peeked outside. The look he gave me wasn't encouraging. More shots were fired. I shot to my feet like a firecracker. Patrick's infamous Chuck Norris grin was plastered across his freckled face. In his hands was a semi-automatic rifle. The dog-like creature jumped on top of the microbus, screaming in protest. Before Patrick could take aim, the beast flew off the van and tackled him to the ground. "No!" I cried out. Terror enveloped me. My hands were shaking. My legs were butter. Joe grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun off the wall. He cocked it, then using the butt of the weapon, he smashed through the window and pointed the weapon. "Damn it," he said. "I can't get a line on this thing." Meanwhile, Patrick was being mauled. The menacing mutt had him pinned to the ground and was tearing him to shreds. The creature's face was a bloodied mess. Its claws clenched around Patrick's neck, squeezing the life out of him. Patrick, reaching desperately for his weapon, was covered head to toe in scratches. Furry found me. If this creature thinks it can feast on my friend, it's got another thing coming. I found a Smith & Wesson lying on top of Patrick's dresser. It would have to do. I opened the cabin door, took aim and fired. Bam! The creature collapsed headfirst on top of Patrick, who quickly freed himself. He found his semi-automatic and went berserk. Joe and I stood transfixed as a boutique of bullets pulverized the dogman. Blood and guts and entrails exploded from his chest, like spaghetti hitting a fan, covering the beast head to toe in gore. The creature shrieked, its crimson teeth glistening under the pale moonlight. It took a tentative step back, wiped the blood from its muzzle, then attacked. With one quick swipe, the beast tore off Patrick's left arm. "Pat!" Joe proclaimed. Joe rushed outside and shot the creature in the back. Patrick fell from its grip like a sack of stones. The beast was caked in red. It looked at Joe and charged. Joe flew into the cabin head first, making it just in the nick of time. The cabin door groaned as the beast slammed into it. The door was on its last legs. Patrick was crying for help. "We gotta save him," I said in between bouts of hysteria. Joe was trembling. He had been nearly dogman food. I know the feeling. The animal was clawing at the door, grunting. "The freezer," I said. "Of course," Joe said, reading my mind. "Dogs like food, especially meat. Something this cabin has plenty of." I found a pack of frozen moose steaks from the freezer. The creature was crouched over Patrick, ready to finish him off. I whistled, stealing its attention, then tossed the meat out the door. The beast started sniffing the offering. Its tongue was dripping with blood. Patrick's blood. The dogman raised its ugly head. Then it attacked the steaks like a hungry bear. Meanwhile, Patrick's intestines spilled across his blood-stained sweater as his lifeless body lay on sodden soil, next to an arm that moments ago belonged to him. The monster was gnawing away on the frozen flesh, grunting and groaning. The sound was sickening. Joe cocked and fired. The shot went wide. "Damn it," he said, shaking his head in dismay. The dog creature dropped the meat and looked at me with venom. I shot the thing square between its eyes. Kablam! Blood exploded from the beast's head in every direction. I fired again, hitting it in the leg. By now I was fuming. Vengeance was mine. The creature dropped to its knees. Fresh blood ran down its face. My eyes darted towards Patrick, who was barely hanging on by a thread. Miraculously, he managed to prop himself up against the back of the van. He was panting. Blood was pouring out of him like wet paint. The creature cried out, sending a wave of chills down my spine. Something called back, then another. There were others. "There must be more of him," I said, barely recognizing the sound of my voice. The howling continued. A pack of dogmen filled the endless night with song. Joe came up behind me. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. "On 3, he whispered. Joe counted. On 3, the door swung open. Joe and I jumped outside, shooting the beast again and again, its body obliterated by the onslaught of ammunition. The dogman floundered, but somehow held its ground. Finally, as our attack persisted, the creature retreated back into the thick of the forest, leaving a trail of blood and matted fur behind. Suddenly, the world went still. Patrick whimpered. "He needs a doctor," I said. "Fast!" Joe called 911, while I stood next to Patrick, holding his one and only hand. It was iceberg cold. He was leaking a tremendous amount of blood. His eyes were barely open, his breathing shallow. Joe arrived with first aid. We tended to Patrick the best we could, but his prospects weren't good. This far north, ambulances aren't waiting around the corner. They don't come on a whim. It took an hour before the helicopter arrived. Patrick was flown to the nearest hospital. The cops showed up soon thereafter with a boatload of questions. Apparently they were acutely aware of this dogman creature and have been for quite some time. This didn't make me feel better. The thing was still lurking in the forest not far from where we were standing. Joe and I sat around the fire until the sun came up. There was no sleep for us that night. We tried to convince ourselves that Patrick would be fine. He's the toughest guy we knew. If anyone could survive an assault of that magnitude, it's him. Meanwhile, we kept a close eye on the edge of the forest, waiting for the creature from the woods to return. Patrick called the following day. Sadly, the doctors couldn't save his arm, but they did save his life. He seemed in good spirits, but was heavily sedated and unable to talk for long. The weight of the world fell from my shoulders. I wouldn't worry too much about Patrick. Knowing him, he's plotting his revenge as I type this. I certainly wouldn't put it past him. Word travels fast in the north. The town of Kapuskasing was once again placed on high alert. People prepared. There are creatures in the woods. Creatures that rip limbs from your body. Creatures that sink their teeth into your flesh and claw at your throat. And not just one, there are others. That said, there's only one monster on my mind as I finish typing this story. The creature who came back from the forest. Dogman. One late summer night, at about 1:30 in the morning, I sat outside and alone in the quiet mountain night. In the distance, I could hear crickets chirping and bullfrogs groaning from the nearby pond at the golf course. The moon hung lazily in the sky, a waxing gibbous, shedding its silvery light on the tall pine trees that surrounded me in the small, fenced-in backyard where I was. Suddenly in the distance, I heard this loud, strange sort of gurgled-sounding animal call. Some friends and I had heard this before at night, but all we knew about it was that it made a coyote come tearing out of the bushes to get away from it one time. It was like nothing that any of us had ever heard before, and we had all lived up here for years. Anyways, like I said, I heard this weird, scary-sounding animal announce its strange gargled bark-like cry off in the distance, presumably far away from me. At least I thought so anyways. But then, not even 1 minute later, without a sound of approach to be heard, the loud, scary, gurgle-sounding bark sounded like it came just from a few feet away from me in the night. I straight up bolted, upright, and started to run 50 feet or so to the back door of the house, practically knocking over the flimsy white plastic patio chair I was sitting in, back into the fence. I remember thinking about looking back to see what the hell it was as I ran, but I thought, hell no, it'll slow me down to look back, and besides, I don't want to know what the hell it is. It took me almost a full minute to get the nerve to peek out the back window and the door, to see what it was after I burst in. But, by the time I did look, there was absolutely nothing, and unfortunately, none of us ever figured out what the hell that creature was.